Hi folks, we're back in the Cobb TV studio with Cobb Commission Chairman Mike Boyce for our weekly visit, which we didn't do last week, but we're back this week, and at some point the weather will transition into fall. We're kind of transitioning in the fall. The weather's not keeping up, but we do have a lot of things on our plate to look at.
Yes, we do. As we all know, the SPLOST is the next big ticket item that we need to be looking at. I think the cities have pretty much come up with what their proposals are, and the staff is preparing its final draft. They'll be presenting to the board at our retreat in the first part of October. And I think the timeline is important here because I've said it for once, I've said it twice, I've said it 100 times. We need to make sure that this list is properly vetted, because it doesn't do any good to have this thing voted on in November of 2020 and it's defeated. So we need to, A, take the temperature of the citizens to see if this is something that they're willing to consider again, and B, the list that we propose out there is something they would support. And it's going to take a number of series of surprise town halls, public hearings to make sure that we validate and vet that list. And underlaying all that, of course, is we're still continuing with the process on the comprehensive transportation plan, because there are some things that have come out of the transit study and the transit survey that we may be able to fund with SPLOST. We don't have to wait until 2022 to put them on the list. But I think it's becoming more and more clear that the reason for doing this in 2022 is actually the right timeline. There's a new player in the process for acquiring funding for transit and transportation projects called the ATL. They have their own ways of seeking funding. We get funding from the federal government, and the Atlanta Regional Commissioner is our conduit for getting that. And of course we have SPLOST, and we have the general fund. So there's a lot of pieces here, revenue streams that we need to make sure are properly channeled into the right projects. So I'm becoming more and more comfortable that as much as I would love to have had this referendum for the transit and transportation sooner, there are just way too many parts and pieces that the community has to be involved in before we're going to be able to put it on the ballot. And I think November 2022 is the right time frame.
In SPLOST in November of 2020,
right.
And we've talked about this before, the SPLOST has an advantage for a considerable amount of that is paid by people who don't live in the county. So when it comes to transportation projects, that's very important. And also discussed during a recent board meeting is the fact that a lot of DOT, Department of Transportation's road paving and those kind of funds come from SPLOST.
Yes, all our paving comes from SPLOST. And you know, there's good things about SPLOST, and then there's some things that once you're in, you know, it's kind of like agreeing to buy into a grant from the federal government. There are strings attached. And in the case of SPLOST, the strings aren't necessarily mandated, but they become inherent in the process. So once we decided to pay for all our repaving and surfacing efforts through SPLOST and took that out of the general fund part of our taxes, then we were committed to that in the future. And we just have to be very, very careful here that we continue to resurface and pave roads here in the county, because the infrastructure is needed to support, at a minimum, 750,000 people who live here, more than that now, plus all the people who come in and out of here, out of the county. And we know that the surfacing and resurfacing efforts under the current 2016 SPLOST was underfunded. And so we get into that trap of you pay me now or you pay me more later. We know that the annual requirement to resurface roads in Cobb County is about $50 million a year under current year dollars. But yet, the 2016 SPLOST only generated enough set-asides or identification for about 35 to 40 million. So now we have at least $10 million, if not more, of resurfacing that we did not do for 6 years per year that we now have to make up for. And then on top of that, go back to the original $50 million that we need to adequately meet the milestones for resurfacing roads. So we're going to need more than $50 million a year in the 2022 SPLOST to get back to where we need to be. Now there is a possibility that because our economy has been doing so well, and we see that in our SPLOST revenue collections, that the law allows us to go back once we have collected revenues to meet all our Tier 1 project funding requirements. We can go back to Tier 1 projects and add funding to them. So we may be able in 2021 or 2022, with the and it looks like right now we're going to generate more SPLOST revenue than we projected. We may be able to go back and apply that to resurfacing of the roads, but that's a board decision. So it's an option. It's out there for the board to consider, and I think it would take a lot of the pressure off the 2022 SPLOST by being able to do that. But it's really way too early to talk about that. And I don't want to get in front of the board, but I've made it very clear that in the 2022 SPLOST, resurfacing is my #1 priority.
And I feel sorry for DOT when I go over there and talk to them that during the recession they started falling behind on paving the roads. Then, as you mentioned, not quite enough money in SPLOST to get the job done. At the same time, our population continues to grow, putting more pressure on the roads. So it's a situation, like you said, where we're playing catch up at this point.
That's right. And like I said, it's not going to get better unless you, again, what's the cost? What's the price for providing quality service? All right? And we know what the cost is. I mean, we have very good planners at our DOT, and they've told us their job is to tell us what the requirement is, and it's our job as the board to decide what we're going to fund. But I can't think of a more emergent need right now, a critical need, than addressing our transit and transportation issues going forward in the next 10 to 15 years, and probably with a comprehensive transportation plan out to 2040. And we do ourselves no good deed by continuing to underfund that criteria of resurfacing. We need to get on top of this and do the right thing.
And I know that's going to be one of the topics when the board has a short 2.5 day retreat.
Right.
And for the first time in your tenure, we're taking it on the road.
We are. We're going to go up to Blairsville. They have a really nice county facility there where we'll be able to sit there and do some team building, as well as address what it is we want to be doing in the future. We'll be bringing back the draft of the strategic plan, because our strategic plan expires at the end of this year. And it's a great opportunity also for the commissioners to give their thoughts about how they see next year and beyond.
The strategic plan that you just mentioned, can you expound on that a little bit? I know in my department we've had to do some work planning ahead. What does that mean? What should our taxpayer residents take out of that? Well,
if you don't have some kind of structure, then you're just going to spend money as it comes to your mind. You need to have some kind of a plan that you can attach your funding streams to. And a strategic plan gives us that skeleton that we can put clothes on. Once we have the strategic plan, then we know what the priorities are for the county, and that drives the budget. And the budget, of course, is shaped by the revenue stream. But this is something that every stellar organization does. Make sure that it's timely, make sure that it's adequately prepared, and receives the widest dissemination so that everybody in that organization understands what the mission and vision of that organization is. And right now everybody knows that my mission for Cobb County has always been from day one to be a place where we can safely work, live, play, and pursue our dreams. But that's just a broad category of what I believe our mission is here in Cobb County. We still have to come up with the vision statement of how we're going to do that, and then out of that vision statement come the programs that will be executed through the budget cycle.
Yeah, and I know one of the priorities of that will be public safety. That's always been top of mind with everybody.
Absolutely.
And next month there's some pay that goes into effect for those folks. And
finally.
Yeah. So that's going to be probably something discussed at the retreat, I would imagine.
Well, I would hope so. We also know that one of the things that was informally committed to during the budget process this year was that to look at a step and grade plan for our first responders. And I know that County Manager Rob Hosack and the budget people and Public Safety Director Randy Kreider, along with former Public Safety Director Mike Register, were putting together a proposal for the board. And we'll be presenting that proposal to the board for consideration. But again, it's all driven by funding. It's all well and good to have a plan and a project, but it doesn't do any good if you don't have any money. So, but I'm confident that next year we will continue to have a prosperous economy that will continue to grow the tax digest, that allow us to maintain the same millage rate, but also use that millage rate, the additional revenue that comes from tax digest growth, to address our number one priority in this county, which is public safety. And that's what we did this year, and that's what we did last year. And I think that we're well on our way to not solving all the problems, but certainly we've made a huge commitment in the last couple of years by what this board has done in approving budgets that provide additional resources to public safety in all fields.
Last question I have is we've talked about the retreat, and we're going to Blairsville this year. It's kind of the first out of town since you've been chairman. As in my prior career, I covered retreats that have touched all corners of the state of Georgia. So why is it important sometimes just to get out of the county or the municipality that you're in?
Well, you know, the first couple of years it was important that we stay here because we had budgetary issues. We didn't have the cash to go do things like go to four parts of the state. The downside to staying in the county is that you're still attached to the everyday work requirements. So you have cell phones. You got to drive here. There's a lot of distractions, and I'm very pleased to say that of the two retreats or meetings that the board had addressing the budget, they were all attended by all the commissioners. But this will be our first opportunity for a retreat. And I think this is important that we just get a little bit outside town. We're not that far. I mean, quite honestly, it's only 100 miles. If you wanted to make that drive up and back every day, you could do that. It's close enough where people who want to come and spend the day there, they can make a day of it and still come back. But I think it's a time where we're truly allowed to focus on just what it is are going to be the important program elements for the future as we move into farther into the 21st century. And this is a kind of a compromise. We didn't stay in town, but we didn't get so far out of town that it drove the expenses up, where people would reasonably ask, "Why are you spending that kind of money, at a resort area on the beach?" So I've been to Blairsville for a class involving my education as a county chairman. And it's a really nice small facility that'll meet our needs. There's a nice hotel next door, but it's not a 5-star. And it'll be a great opportunity to sit in the backdrop of some really majestic scenery behind the community center and allow us to take a deep breath and focus on the big picture rather than just the day-to-day stuff. This doesn't allow us to look to think strategically.
All right. Well, as the chairman mentioned, those are open meetings, so we'll be posting some information on those as we get closer to them and as they happen as well. And of course, you can subscribe to all our social media, the chairman's newsletter, and Cobb Line Weekly, other newsletters we do at Cobb County to stay in touch with everything we got going on here.
So see you next week.
All righty. Thanks.